I am delighted to introduce Ms. Biswas. I have been watching her work on Facebook for years. Because I was a Michigan resident and she now lives in Michigan, there was that tie. Her work is gorgeous. She creates beautiful things from upcycled materials. She's a speaker, teacher. She just closed a beautiful artist in residence show. Her work has been exhibited many places, including part of the State Department's Art in Embassies program. She will be talking to us today about her work, her life, how it was deeply attached to her Indian ancestry, culture, life experience, and her education there. So I am going to turn this over to Elizabeth with AV and Boisali, and thank you all for joining us. We're going to see some gorgeous work.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jane. Jane was the first person to contact me, and it's a real pleasure to speak to you today and speak about my journey, which is, so it's my pleasure to really speak to you all. Jane was the one who first contacted me, and then I spoke to her one day at length what I'm going to talk about. And also then Elizabeth got in touch with me to figure out the technical stuff. So I hope you like my presentation. And today I'm going to talk about basically my journey of about, I would say about 35 years, where I started as a fiber artist and what I do today. It's a pretty long journey, and tomorrow I'll be talking more about the technical stuff and the materials that I use. So I'm basically going to start right from the beginning. I have been working with primarily with fibers and textile art as my medium. And right from the beginning, for whatever reason, when I finished my undergraduate studies, I had an intention to create art with the medium. I was not much interested in functional textiles. I come from India, which has a very rich textile heritage and cultural heritage. And the amount of commercial textiles that we find there is just unbelievable. So I grew up seeing all of that. And I somehow didn't want to recreate what we already had over there. So my intention was to mainly create art by using the textile medium. And so that's where my journey started. And when I graduated from my undergraduate school, at that time, textile was not really established as an art medium in India, at least. Maybe in the Western world, it was more prevalent, but in India, not much people were working on art with as a textile medium. So I was kind of lost when I graduated, and I didn't know where to go, and I didn't have much direction and guidance too. But I started my journey, and after I came here, it pretty much got more advanced, I think, with all the things that I got over here. So the particular slide that you see over here is my dining room studio, dining room, which I took over as my second studio. Where I'm sitting now is my main studio in the basement. It's not a walkout basement. So I love to look outside when I'm working, and I love natural light. So a few years back, I took over our formal dining room and made it my second studio. And that's where you see I have a small Harrisville loom over there, a 4-shaft. And that's my dining table with all the materials there. So I don't know if any of you have read my bio or have visited my website. I went to a very unique school in India for my undergraduate studies. It was founded by Tagore, and the place was called Shantiniketan. And he was a very prolific philosopher, writer, poet, and songwriter an artist in his later age. So he founded this university, which was very unique. It was all set in nature, and nature was completely entwined in our lives. It was a way of life almost, spending time at that university, at the campus. And arts were completely entwined in our lives, like from music to drama to writing and poetry. Everything was very much a part of our curriculum. We could not stay away from it. It was part of our lives. So spending 5 years at that university, it kind of changed my life totally. And that stayed with me for my entire life. And that inspiration and the ideology and everything about the university and the campus. Even though I graduated almost about 35 years back, it continues to influence me and inspire me. So that comes back in my work all the time. So this is just one main shot of the university, of the campus, where he meditated at the beginning, and that's where the foundation stone was laid. So I included a picture of that. We celebrated the seasons. It was a very secular university, and we didn't celebrate any festivals or any religious festivals as such, but all the seasons were celebrated. So these particular pictures, just to give you an idea of, we had a tree planting ceremony during the monsoon season, and this was all the decorations and making of jewelry from flowers and leaves and everything. So just to give you an idea of the whole occasion. Actually, this was the tree planting ceremony. So we celebrated all the seasons in different ways, and this was just to give you an idea of that. This is again the campus of art department. The art department was on this campus here. Here you see a window over here. That was my studio at that time. And then it was covered with a mural by one of our professors. And these are the different seasons, and almost the same location. The one on the right at the bottom, that's me about when I was in my teens, and my roommate. We were doing a floor painting, which is a very typical thing of this university, and it's also a very traditional floor decoration that's done all over India, and it's very ephemeral. It's not permanent. We just do it for special occasions and events, and we normally do it with rice flour or rice paste, and we do it with our hands normally, and sometimes we use the brush. So we were doing that, me and my roommate, we were doing it for some special occasion. And I included that because I have done part of it on my patio, and it's a very similar thing. I don't know if you have seen my website, but we have an outdoor patio on which my daughter and I did the same thing. It's more permanent, it's not temporary, but we try to maintain it. So I included that picture over here just to give you an idea of that style of floor painting that's very traditional in India. So we have come here to this country. It's about 32 years now. And after I graduated with my undergraduate degree, and we came here to Columbus, Ohio, I followed my husband, who came here to do his PhD, his master's and PhD in mechanical engineering. And I came here with just a bag of some yarns and some fabrics. and a big needle, and that was it pretty much. I just didn't have any more space in the suitcase. And so when I came here, before that, I had not woven on any loom as such. In India, it was not prevalent to have to own looms. Like people like us, we didn't have looms. It was the looms belonged to only the weavers, who were in like thousands of numbers, and people could not, at that time, they could not imagine having a loom and weaving at home. It was only the weavers who used to actually weave. So I didn't have much exposure to weaving on a floor loom or a table loom or anything. So when I had started over there, I started with needle weaving on a frame loom. I took it to much larger scale from a small frame. So first I'm going to start there and show you where I started my journey with weaving. And also I want to let you know that over the years, I've experimented a lot with a lot of different techniques within the textile medium. I've always been interested in weaving, but I have been interested in surface design also, like dyeing of fabrics and manipulation of fabrics, printing and stitching on fabric. And that I became more interested after I came here. And while doing my master's, I learned a lot of techniques during my master's, during my MFA. So at that time, I felt like I can combine my weaving with my surface design. So I experimented a lot with the different techniques and things you can do within the textile medium. And that's one thing that I really like about the textile medium, because uh, there are so many mediums within the medium. So basically it's endless. The possibilities are endless. So that's where my interest lies. And I do a lot of experimentation with dyes and weaving and anything. So this is where my needle weaving started. This was a sampler that we were taught to do, and this was needle weaving. This was a piece of about 1 foot by 1.5, and we made these little grids on the frame. We had nails at the back, and we just made a simple grid, and each of those squares became an area where we experimented with, where we wove with needles, basically. So that's where we started even creating patterns and getting the feel of weaving, basically, of creating cloth. So that was my very first piece with needle weaving. And then from there, I went a little more crazy, I would say, and I left the square grid and I experimented with creating shapes with the tension on the yarns, and I created different shapes and started weaving in those areas with the needle itself. So these were some of my beginning needle weaving. Then after that, I took it to a larger scale, and I started with frames which were about more than 2 feet by 3 feet or something like that. And all I did was just drive nails at the top and bottom and use very simple jute yarn or anything that I could find. I used a lot of toned saris, my mom's old saris, which were very thin weight. And because of the beautiful prints, they created beautiful textures too. So those were kind of landscapes from India before I came here, and I used any kinds of yarns that I could get hold of. If I didn't find the right color yarn, I would tear up any fabric into strips, like how you make rag weaving. And I wove with a big fat needle with those frame looms. This was one which I did first when I came to this country, And I just brought those few yarns with me, and you can see how the landscape changed, because that's what I saw through our little window of our first apartment many years back. And I just had those few yarns that I could play with, and you can see how the landscape completely changed in this. So this was my very first weaving after I came here. And then after, when I was doing that, I came to know of Columbus Cultural Arts Center at Columbus, Ohio, and they had weaving classes. So I signed up for their weaving classes, and that was where I was first exposed to floor looms. And I learned to weave on floor looms, and that completely changed my work. And it was just fascinating that how much you can do on a floor loom. And so it completely changed my direction of work too. So I have what I've done in this slideshow is I have included each kind of work that I have done over the years. I could not include all my work, but I've tried to give you a sampling of each kind of things that I have done with the medium. And now we are going to see some assemblages, which are combination of, as I mentioned earlier, combination of weaving and surface design. And you can see in the pieces and how I have combined the two mediums. This was called Celebration of Life, and you can see that I wove the center panel, and then I screen printed the fabrics on the side with either with discharge or with dyes. I have always tried to include other materials too in as the weft, including some ceramic pieces that I had made in the ceramic class. I have included natural materials, reeds, and all kinds of stuff that I can find on hand, wire or any other materials. So you can see that I wove a little tapestry in the middle over there with two ceramic pieces. And then I put this all together with machine quilting. Again, I have never taken quilting classes, so I don't really technically know how to do a proper quilt, and I'm very thankful for art quilts, basically, where I can do whatever I want to. And so my quilts are my own version of art quilts. This is a big piece, about 5 feet by 6 feet, almost 5 by 4.5, 4, I think. This was, again, a combination of surface design and weaving. And this whole fabric on the right was a black fabric, which I discharged and did shibori on it. And then I screen printed, and I attached all these woven pieces. This was woven with reed, and it has embroidery on it and machine quilting. I made the wooden beads, which I included, and different kinds of weaves over here. So that was an assemblage, and it was inspired by Indian architecture in Western India. This is a more recent piece. It was made just before the pandemic, but it became very kind of relevant during the pandemic because of the, sorry? And in this, you can see it's a very complex assemblage. I have fabrics, I have weavings, and in a piece like this, I normally take out whatever scraps I have and whatever goes with the piece, and some I try to create also in need, which I feel will be right for the piece. So this was a very complex piece that I made a few years back, and it is stretched on a frame. It is a quilt. It is an art quilt, but it is stretched on a frame. And what you see in the middle is a styrofoam form. That's why I have a close-up over here. I if I find any interesting styrofoam forms, I save it and I try to use it in my work because it is not biodegradable. So I try to use it in some way or the other, and I cover it with fabric, with paper. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but this is what I have in the middle over here, and it's kind of a 3D element to the whole piece. And this has embroidery and weaving. It has some weaving with copper strips and some wooden strips too, which are inserted into the areas over here. So this is a rather complex piece, which I don't normally do, but sometimes I like to venture into things like this. This is another piece which doesn't have any weaving in it, but it has photo transfer on fabric, and this is paper which I quilted through. It has heavy beading, and it was started with a black fabric and discharged and over dyed and embroidered, of course. This was a painted warp. I'm sure many of you have tried painted warp in your guild, but I love painted warp. It's one of my favorite things to do. And this was a narrow warp and a long warp, and I cut it up into 9 components, and I stretched them on canvases, and I added embroidery to it and some applique with translucent fabrics. And each square is about 12 by 12. This is another assemblage with weaving and fabrics and embroidery, and it has some paper weaving over here, which I'll come to later. But this is all woven with paper, and these are translucent fabrics like a silk organza, which I have appliqued on the piece. And as you can tell that these side panels were ikat, and these were painted warp. So this is another complex piece which has a lot going on, and it's about 4 feet wide. This is another assemblage which has a lot of my weavings and fabrics, but a lot of commercial fabrics too from India. These are commercial fabrics, but I wove these and this, and it has applique with different things and different materials too. This was again inspired by architecture of India, and it's a pretty big piece, and it has 3D elements in it too. This was woven with copper and paper, and this has 3D kind of pillars which are stuffed inside, and it's all quilted with my hand woven fabrics. This is another assemblage which has a lot going on. It has weaving and surface design. I don't know if any of you can recognize, these are onion bags that we buy our onions in, the orange netting bags, and I weave with those bags. I don't throw them out, or I don't know if they recycle, but I save them and I use it as weft in my weaving. So that color orange kind of dictated the color scheme of this piece. And this has been weaving with paper over here. It was painted on paper and then cut up and woven with the paper. And I'll come to that later. I have done a lot of that, which I call painted weavings. It has embroidery and shibori and other techniques in this. So this is also a pretty complex piece. It's about 5.5 by 4 feet, I think. And this was inspired by my home in India, which is a multi-storied building, and my parents lived there all their life. So whenever I think of home, I think of the architecture and the multi-storied buildings over there. So this was completely an inspiration from there. after my father became ill, and then he passed away. And this was a whole series I did after he passed away, of my parents at the balcony and at the windows and at the those multi-storied building and the stairs and everything that come to my mind. This is another, these two are assemblages on styrofoam shapes. As you can tell, these are two different works. This is to show you how thick, this is about 4 inches thick, this styrofoam shape. And what I do normally is I covered it with decoupage with paper or fabrics, and I paint on it. And this had a nice big window, which I inserted from the back. I assembled it with one of my weavings. So this is a more recent piece, which was part of my artist in residence program, and this was older. And this again, the whole styrofoam is covered. It's not exposed anywhere, so it is not fragile or anything. It's really hard, but very light because styrofoam is light. And I inserted a weaving in the center over there. These two are called Palace Peaks at Night, which were inspired by the Sonnet Lumiere program at in one of those Indian castles and Indian forts, I mean. And these were done at two different times, and this was more recent, and the one on the left was, I did it long time back, which again I wove with paper and I quilted through it. What you can't really see in the pictures, there is dark blue and black. I discharged that fabric and quilted through it, and these were woven panels in between. And this didn't have much of my weaving. It was a black fabric that I discharged and screen printed and appliqued with stencils. And this was a much recent piece. The next one, I'm going to show you some art quills which are kind of overlap between the assemblages and the art quills, but these are mostly fabrics. This was my first quilt ever in my life, about my daughter when she was growing up. I spent the first 3 years of her life with her at home, and it was a real fun experience. So these were her words and my feelings about raising her, and it was her pictures transferred onto fabrics with screen printing. This was our little world, again, me spending time with her, and this didn't have any weaving either. This was just fabrics and my way of doing art quilting. It is not, if you do quilting, any of you don't look at it from a quilter's angle, because I'm not very good at piecing and all the technical stuff with quilting. So most of my quilts are one fabric quilt. It's a large fabric that I create using different techniques, and then I put them together. This is another art quilt that I appliqued and stamped with gold. Those circles are gold stamps that I stamped with, and they are machine quilted and hand quilted, but not very elaborate quilting. This is a big quilt which was commissioned by the St. Joe's Hospital over here in Ann Arbor, and it was inspired by Australian Aboriginal art. And I started with completely with white fabric. I dyed and screen printed or discharge printed shibori and all kinds of techniques, again, hand painting. And it doesn't have very elaborate quilting on it, but it was just machine zigzagged on the joints over there. So it was not elaborately quilted. This is called Nightfall, the piece on the left. It was inspired by my landing in India at the middle of the night, and is looking at Earth from above. It was started with a black fabric. I discharged it, and then I over dyed, and it was embroidered, heavily embroidered, hand embroidered. So many people just love this piece. It's quite big, so I have made similar versions of smaller ones too, which are much smaller. These are a foot by 1 foot, and these are 8 inches by 8 inches, which were part of my recent artist in residence show. And people just love the effect because it's on cotton velveteen, and they have very rich black, and the colors are very rich because of the material that I use. This is another art quilt inspired by my parents on the balcony, and it all started with white fabric. I shibori dyed, I appliqued, and hand stitched, and some places I have even layered with the onion bag netting with kind of tulle, and it's just orange netting that I use as layering too sometimes because it softens the surface. This is a piece that I had screen printed with discharge paste. I didn't quilt on it. I just embroidered a little bit, and I stretched it on a frame. And this green I got out of an over-dyed fabric, which I could never reproduce again because it was a black fabric to start with, and it was not. It was a disaster, the original piece. So I over-dyed it many times, and then when I screen printed it, I got this beautiful green which I could never repeat. So this is one of my favorite pieces, and I used stamps which I had created carved out of wood, and those deer stamps I used, and then I did some embroidery over here with the birds and the red birds and the lines over here. These are some fiber sculptures. I love to combine different materials. So ceramics and clay is another favorite medium of whenever I could get my hands on, I take ceramic classes. And I love to combine all different techniques and materials. So I created, I'll come to later, but these are some multi-layered weaving which I was trying at one time. And I wove with reed. Reed is what you weave baskets with. And when you soak the reed, I could shape them, tie them and shape them, and then when I left them to dry, they would take these different shapes. So that's what I was doing at one time, and these are all multi-layered weaving. I wove like 3 or 4 layers at one time, but now I've gone back to this weaving with reed and shaping them and creating sculptural pieces. This is one which is a combination of ceramics and weaving. The inside structure was ceramics and it was raku, if any of you are familiar with ceramics. And then I wove with raffia and sisal, which I had dyed and wrapped around that form basically to create these sculptures. These are again combination of ceramics and textiles. These top panels were created in ceramic classes. Then I combined different materials and attached them to the ceramic panels on top. This has weaving with paper and yarns, and it has also a quilted fabric on top. And this is entirely woven with paper, with painted paper, and this has an applique with silk organza on top. So again, these are examples to show you how I combine the different materials in my work. And this one on the right, I call it Tree of Life, not Tree of Life, of what's that? Of the ribbons they tie on the trees. Have you? I don't know if you have seen in any places, and that was the inspiration for this piece. These are again three-dimensional pieces. This was a driftwood that I combined it with the weaving. With I wove this actually with wire, and I attached it to the driftwood. And this is a very new piece that sold from my last show too. These are again the shaped weavings which I wove with reed, and I shaped them. And I'm playing with translucent weaving now and shadows basically. So I'm trying to hang my work away from from the wall. And if there is perfect lighting, I'm loving the shadows that are created with from the weavings. So these two were at my recent show that just came down day before yesterday, and so I combined the different materials. These are maple seeds. This has a little basket with stones in it, and this again is styrofoam that I covered with decoupage and fabric, and I painted over it. These are my painted weavings, which kind of happened by chance. I had boxes full of these duplicate photographs that we used to get at one time, getting our photographs printed. I shredded them in the shredder, and I wove with them. And this is a mobile that I created many years back. And that's when I started my paper weaving. So I had the warp with cotton yarns, and I used the weft. In this case, it was shredded photographs, which I didn't try to put back again. I just used them for the color, and they are reversible. I put them back to back, and I wove with them, and I created this mobile. So after I did this, I thought, why not paint on paper and cut them up and then use them as my weft. So that's where my painted weavings originated. So at the same time, I found this beautiful textured paintable wallpaper at Home Depot, and I have always been fascinated by textures, and I always loved using textures in my work. So I got one roll of that, and I started painting on those, and then cutting them up and using those strips as my weft. But in this case, when I started the painted weaving, I put back the weavings like a jigsaw puzzle almost, not like the previous one that you saw. In this, I didn't try to put back the pictures. But when I started painting on the paper, I saw it as like painting on a canvas, and then I cut it into strips and used those strips as my weft. And this technique has evolved over the years. When I started, I had started with much thicker threads, like just cotton threads, which were 2x3 or something. But now for the warp, I use 2x20, which is real thin thread, and it just shows on the surface. It is there on the surface, but then it's not very prominent. The painting is prominent. These two pieces on the right, they traveled for like 3 years through the Art and Embassies program to 3 different countries. And
Lady's amazing.
now this is part of a hospital in St. Joe's Hospital in Ann Arbor. These are again some samples of the painted weaving. And with the paper, I also kind of use like stuffed yarns and the orange netting, whatever I could find on hand, and I kind of included them for the texture and 3D quality in the weaving. So these are some samples again. This one on the left was bought by a hospital in Upper Michigan a couple of years back. This is a series I call Portals, which doors became the prominent metaphor in my work, and kind of signifying the two worlds that I live in, because my soul kind of still lives in India, even though I have lived in this country for many years. I have adapted very well, but still I was born there, raised there, so my soul really lives there still. And so the door became a metaphor in my work, and you can see the floor paintings also came into the work, and these were again painted on that wallpaper and cut up and woven. They are various sizes. The ones on the sides were small, like just 9 by 12, and this was 16 by 20 or something. These are a little bigger, and I used some, with the painted paper, I also used some cheesecloth for like collage and adding some more textures to the surface. And I also used paper on the surface to collage with. And then after finishing the collage, that's when I started cutting them up and weaving with that. So you can see the threads are very thin now, just 2 by 20 on the surface, and it creates a different surface on the weaving now than just the paper. This is again an assemblage. It has weaving in the middle, and it has screen printed fabrics on the sides, which are again stitched heavily, hand stitched. And this is a paper weaving in the middle. These are some samples of paper weaving. This was commissioned by a Jewish friend who was also a scuba diver. So she wanted marine life kind of included in the Tree of Life theme with Jewish motifs. So that's where all this got assembled into, like the Jewish motifs with the marine life and the fish and the dolphin and everything. This was a recycled piece which didn't work at the beginning. I took it all up. I didn't take apart the weaving first, but I repainted on it, just like kind of a Jackson Pollock-like procedure. I kind of splattered paint all over, and then I took apart the weaving and rewove it back into this thing, and it was sold from one show immediately. This was one of my favorite pieces. I really wish I hadn't sold it. This was another piece which sold, which is a real favorite of mine. This was Sunflowers, which was again a painted weaving. These are more recent pieces and heavily textured, and I added some other materials, other elements too in it, like wrapping around sisal and with wire, and I inserted it into the weaving. This was commissioned by a friend. It's a diptych. These were inspired by my parents again, and a lot of times in India we use clothesline a lot. So clothesline kind of have been creeping into my themes for a long time, because whenever I think of my home country, I can envision those clothesline on the rooftops and on the balconies. So those kind of started coming into my compositions, and these were painted weavings again, inspired by my parents. And then a few years back, we started raising monarchs in our backyard, and that's where the monarchs came in. And we have been doing that ever since. And so that's where the monarchs also came into the compositions. This was another recent commission from a friend in Chicago. It was a triptych. This was another commission by a friend, which I finished recently, and I had included it in my recent show, which came down 2 days back. And this was inspired by the architecture of India. Here are a few examples of wearables. I don't do a whole lot of wearables, but sew clothes for myself and my daughter because I haven't taken any classes in stitching or drafting. So yeah, so I do it, and again, like my art quilts are in my own way. So these I don't know how to use patterns, but I just make up my own patterns, and I can make only my own dresses or whatever. So these again were combinations of my weaving and fabric, and this was part of my MFA thesis show. This was screen printed and it didn't have any weaving, but it started from white and I screen printed and hand painted and put it together. These are some more where I combined my weaving with screen printed fabrics. These were all part of my MFA show. This was again screen printed and the pattern made by myself, and I just came up with funky patterns and put them together. None of them. This was my daughter's prom dress that she wanted me to make, so I chose some silk scarves that I used to make at that time, and then I put together the whole assemble. Even the one on the chest over here with feathers and silk scarves and beads. She's a classical dancer. She does one of the Indian classical dances, and I try to make all her costumes, and these are examples of 3 costumes that I had made. In this, I made the fabric, but the rest were all commercial fabrics. But again, I didn't use any pattern or anything. I just put them together. So I can make only dresses for myself and my daughter, basically. These are saris that I screen printed. I don't know if you're familiar with Indian saris, but they're about 6 yards long, more than 6 yards. So I had screen printed them. I had put together 2 tables because now I don't have such a big table, but I used to print at night in the department during my MFA. And these are a few examples of a screen printed sari that I did. These are all on Tassa silk, and I got them from India and I printed on them. This was an embroidered sari which I did at one time, long time back, many years back, and I'll never do it again because it took me forever, and it was all hand embroidered with about 17 colors, and it was inspired by a typical folk art of India. And this end portion is another tree of life. These are some close-ups. These were different motifs on the border, and this was the end part, which was the tree of life. And this was all hand embroidered with running stitch. I don't know if you're familiar with kantha embroidery, they call it now, and it's just basically running stitch. This was part of the 25 million stitches. I don't know if any of you participated in that, but it was all hand stitched panels, each stitch representing a refugee of the world. And at that time when they came up with this project, I think we had 25 million refugees in the whole world, but now we have a lot more. And the idea was to have the whole, it was a community project where people donated these panels with hand stitching on it. And this was my donation to the project, which is now showing in Arizona, I think. But first it was inaugurated in California, and I think more than 3,000 panels were donated from all over the world. It's a very interesting project. They have a nice website. It's called the 25 Million Stitches. You can go on that website and you can see a lot more panels which are very interesting and beautiful, and it's all dedicated to the refugees of the world. And now I come to a different kind of weaving, which I call it serendipitous weaving because I don't have any plans for it. And I usually don't throw any of my loom ends or anything, warp yarns or anything in the trash. I just save everything on that table that you saw at the right at the beginning. And this was a whole series that I did a few years back, and these were all Christmas gifts to my friends. And I call it serendipitous weaving because I don't really start with any plans, and whatever I have on hand, I created these little hangings that I sent out to friends. I think I had made about 55 of them that year. And they all look different, and I had nothing in plan, just they were about 8 inches wide, 8 inches in length and about 6 inches wide. And then I took those a little further and I stretched them on canvases because the fringes would not stay very neatly at shows. So I stretched them on canvases, and that's what these resulted in. And I did many of these too, in which I included paper and copper and all the nettings and whatever I could find on hand. These are some bigger pieces, and yeah, they're basically all my scrap yarns. I painted some of the warp. It was all cotton warp. I painted some areas with acrylic paint, but very diluted acrylic paint. And I inserted whatever I could, and no plans whatsoever, but they kind of look like abstract landscapes at the end. This is what translucent weaving is, what I'm experimenting on now. This is my latest work. This is a term which you can find online, Jamdani, and it is a very traditional weaving technique. It's basically inlay weaving, which they use in India and Bangladesh. And they create these beautiful saris that you see on the right-hand corner over here. And these saris are about 6 yards or 7 yards long. And I had no intention of recreating those saris because they have been woven by these master weavers over the years. We go back to like maybe 500, 600 years. So I wanted to use the technique. It's a very simple extra weft inlay technique on plain weaving. So that's where I thought I can use my shapes and motifs with the same technique. And if I hang them away from the wall with proper lighting, I could create beautiful shadows on the wall. So that's where my idea originated, and this was the first piece. I'm still working on that technique, and every piece is evolving with the next one. This was my second piece, which I used. I also did one applique, and you can see the shadows over here, but I did some applique too, and these were the inlay shapes, which created the shadows again on the wall. This was at the Muskegon Museum of Art in the 92nd Contemporary Show. And again, you can see the beautiful shadows created. I typically hang them about 6 inches away from the wall. And where I have the inlays, those create like opaque shapes in the weaving, and the rest I beat very lightly, and I'm using very thin yarns to create kind of a translucent fabric. So you can see the translucency over here, and you can see the shadows they create over here. You can see the shadows again. And then gradually the clothesline became a kind of a prominent metaphor in my work. during COVID, when I wasn't able to visit home for more than 2.5 years. And as I said, like whenever I used to think of home, I could see those clothesline on the rooftops and on the balconies. So that kind of started coming in more as a visual metaphor in my work. And I started painting the warps a little bit. I started spacing them out like you see over here. And they created these beautiful, fascinating shadows if there was proper lighting in the gallery. So these are some examples of that again. This was my latest piece where the clothesline was a complete different element away from the weaving. So this was, the weaving was about 5 inches away from the wall and the clothesline was 8 inches away. So it created beautiful shadows on the architecture. Visually I could see like old architecture and buildings in, say, in Italy or somewhere. You can see those clothesline a lot, and I could see the shadows of the clotheslines. Here I don't have the clothesline, but these were different countries. Kind of, this was an installation that I did. It was a triptych, and it was basically 3 different countries, and there was this clothesline, which was a metaphor, like connecting the women of the world through the clothesline. That was my idea, and a friend of mine, he had written a beautiful poem on this theme, and so it was a collaborative work with his poem and my installation with these translucent pieces. These are few installations. These are the styrofoam boxes, the cubes again, which we get ceramic mugs in. And I wove these translucent panels, and I attached them in the center of the boxes and inside the box so that they could be away from the wall. And they again create these beautiful shadows. So this was one series of that concept. This was another series which I shaped them. I didn't leave the weaving plain, but it was the areas where I wove with reed, I soaked them and shaped them to make them more sculptural. And this was acquired by a new college over here called the Baker College. And I think this month they are going to install it. This was a recent piece. It was a commission that I have to send out to a friend in California, and she commissioned me a similar piece like you saw earlier, but she wanted earth tones and more browns and the earth colors. So this was my interpretation of that, and it was in my last show that came down 2 days back. This whole installation, I call it Diaphanous Illusions. It again is translucent panels with the main material for this are those onion bags, and I've used a lot of yarns too and painted warp. I paint as I weave with very dilute acrylic paints. And I have about, so far I have about 42 panels, and I call it a growing installation because every time it is installed in a space, I add some more different panels to it, completely different. So I have some pictures to show you which look very different. That was in 2019, and then during the pandemic, I added some more panels to it, and I added these yellow ones which came from the lemon bags actually, and they added a complete different look to the whole installation. This was at Urban Institute earlier this year, and you can see that I added some natural materials to it, like maple seeds and ginkgo leaves, wheat grass. You can see on the right over here. That added different element to that to the whole installation. And now I have about 42 panels, and I had started off with 27, I think. These are some exhibition views. This was kind of a retrospective at Columbus Cultural Arts Center in 2019. It was a fairly big gallery, and I'd included my work over like 25 years. This was one side, and this was another side. This wall was dedicated to my parents because all these pieces were inspired by my parents. This was in Chicago many years back. This was in Maryland. This was also, I think, in 2015. This was in 2021, and I had done a demo of the floor painting. You can see that in the pictures. And these are some of the installation views. This was from my recent show at Bay City, which was my artist in residence show. I included these to show you some of the installation views. This was another wall, and this from the same show. And this is our backyard patio that I mentioned at the beginning of the slideshow, which the floor was done by my daughter and myself. It was just simple doodling with a brush with porch paint, which unfortunately doesn't stay as beautiful as this because it's Michigan and we have like at least 2 months we have snow sitting on this floor over here. So it's not really, it was not a very wise thing to do basically, because I have to maintain it and touch it up every now and then. And I had painted the fence, which was a very old fence. So yeah, that's kind of the end of my slideshow. Just included a little.
So thank you so much, Boisali. It was just gorgeous.
Thank you.
A reminder, if you have questions, put them in the chat and then Elizabeth will curate them. But wow, I'm so inspired.
Yeah, that was awesome. I do have a question from June, which is, what does discharged mean with respect to fabric?
Okay, discharge is when you have a darker fabric. You know, at home, a lot of times we drop bleach on our clothes. And have you noticed how bleach takes off the dye from your clothing? So that is basically discharge. And when you're using it in a more controlled way, that is what discharge does. Like, you know how when we do tie-dye, we tie up the cloth and tie it with rubber bands or yarns or whatever. Instead of putting that in a dye bath, if you put it in a bleach bath, what it does is takes off the darker color and you create those patterns. So basically discharge is that taking off the color of the original fabric. So you can do it with multiple things. With chlorine bleach, it works a little faster, but you don't have much control when you're doing with chlorine bleach. So now they have come up with different chemicals which you can have more control, and it's called thiox. Or I don't know if any of you get materials from Dharma Trading or Prochem. They have these materials for discharging, and there are 2 or 3 different chemicals, I think, which you can use. Some of them don't have they have a bad odor, so it's recommended that you use outdoors and you work in the summer. That's what I do when I do my discharging. I do it outside. I don't do it indoors during winter. So basically, discharge is taking off color from a darker shade of fabric.
Cool. And then Jane was wondering, for the painted paper then woven, how do you do it? Do you paint the picture and then weave it, or?
Yeah, I paint on the paper as if I'm painting on a canvas. I take a large sheet of paper and I paint on it like I'm painting on a canvas. And then I cut it up into strips and use those strips as my weft. So when I'm cutting them, I number them normally so they come back in order. And in between the strips, I put a very thin yarn to hold them in place. Otherwise, they have a tendency to kind of slip and overlap and all that. So to create a neater surface, I put one thin yarn in between those strips. If you see them up close, you can see that.
Yeah. And how wide are those paper strips?
About 1/2 inch to 3/4. I used to cut them straight before when I started off. Now I cut them little wavy and I use my beater. I don't use the reed most often. I use a hand beater to beat them down because I feel with the wavy shapes, they create a more organic feel to the whole painting, to the whole weaving.
I also have a message from Amy saying that she loves the use of your recycled materials and installation, hanging, and your reuse of styrofoam is to be applauded. Thanks for the incredible presentation of your weaving journey.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be talking about more about the materials and techniques. I think I'm going to include more, some more pictures, but there'll be a lot of overlaps to show you what I've done in each of those pieces. So yeah, I'll be talking about more of those materials and techniques tomorrow.
Okay. And Rosie was wondering if you treat the plant matter with anything to preserve them.
You know what? I don't normally like the wheat when I used it. It was from I think I got it at Michael's or Joanne, and I didn't treat it with anything. But the ginkgo leaves, I soaked them in glycerine because I read it on Google. It isn't as fragile, but then I handle it very carefully. I don't weave with the ginkgo leaves. I added them after I took the weaving off the loom. And when I send them out anywhere, I pack them very carefully.
And then also, what type of fabric paint do you use for your stamps?
Just regular fabric paints from Dharma, you know, those, just any fabric paint works actually for the stems. And yeah.
Cool. Those
Any other questions? I have a lot more pieces on my website actually. So if any of you have any questions there, you can shoot me an email or any questions. Yeah, you can get in touch with me anytime.
And I will put a link to your website in the chat in just a second. All right.
And I put the website to the 25 million stitches
Yeah,
in
I
the
saw
chat.
that.
And they have a Facebook page as well. I had
Yeah.
not heard of that. Well, so if there are no other questions, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Come
Thank
back-
you all for
Come back,
inviting me.
everyone, come back tomorrow and we will learn more about the techniques, how she chooses these materials, and especially a highlight on her upcycling. She told me that she never buys materials or rarely buys materials. And
Yeah.
we'll hear about that tomorrow. And we're going to now turn us back over to Amy with a show and tell. You're welcome to stay.
Yeah.
We wish we could take you to lunch, but we're kind of far away. And
But
so
this has been a real pleasure for me. This is wonderful.
Yeah. And Boisali, I didn't realize it. We have another connection. I went to Ohio State University,
Oh, really?
probably when you were still in India, though.
Yeah, we were there for about 8 years, from 90 to 97. Yeah,
And
for
I was
about
here in
7 years.
the early 70s. So,
Okay.
okay, Amy, back at you.
Thank you so much, Boisali. I'm just so in awe of your work. And the things that you were talking about, especially seeing the shadows of your work against the wall, it just gave my spine tingles. It was really intriguing because you're just building depth and layers and layers and layers.
Yeah. If you have the right lighting, it just looks incredible. In fact, one show that I had, I called it If Shadows Could Talk. And the whole show was to do with the shadows. So in everything there, the shadows also had a different perspective altogether. So people really loved that. And I'm still working on that technique. And I am still planning to do installations where people can walk within the installations and within the shadows and everything together.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And I loved that you included the video at the end of your slideshow, because it's lovely to see the movement. It looks like there is a lot of movement in your work.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, they're very light. Those the pieces that I'm doing now, they're extremely light, and any little breeze and they move around and they create shadows, and that movement is just beautiful.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
So like Jane said, you are welcome to stay and watch our show and tell if you would like, or if you have other things to do, we totally understand, and you can bow out at any time. So,
oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think I'll go ahead because I have to make the slideshow for tomorrow. I was wondering what I have to put together.
well,
so I think I'll do that.
And we will see you tomorrow night.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, all of you. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.